As I said, I'm Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. I happen to be in Toronto today and on a beautiful, as someone has just said in the chat, sunny, snowy day, which is lovely. We're appreciative of this weather. We need some hopefulness. And I'm joined by Councillor Kristyn Wong-Tam, who's a downtown councillor who lives the downtown story every day. And I can see some sunshine behind you, Kristyn, which is appreciative. I bet you're like me, glad just to see the sun, eh?
Absolutely, and I'm just thrilled to be here and to join you and all the viewers who are tuning in.
Yeah, well, it's a really important topic, and Toronto is the traditional territory of many First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, now home to many, many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis across Turtle Island. We have treaties that are covered here. Treaty 13 signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty signed with multiple Anishinaabe nations. And we at CUI for the last 2 years, as we've been broadcasting live on these shows, City Talks, have been talking openly about our own struggles with the legacies of exclusion that urbanism has continued to perpetuate from colonial and pre-colonial times. And here we are, trying to understand and recreate cities that are inclusive and welcoming of everyone, and come to terms with the legacies that we have to bear. But also, Kristyn, I know you live this day in and day out, in terms of you are actually on a corridor, on a historic main street, Yonge Street, which has a storied history, and I'm sure will have a remarkable future. But before we go to you, because I appreciate your joining us in between budget, and I just want to acknowledge that this is a really busy time across the country. The federal cabinet is meeting, caucus is meeting, provincial governments are frantically trying to make sure that they've got their budgets in shape, and almost every municipal government is either in budget or in some kind of hearing process to try to figure out how are they going to actually pay for the resources, that have the resources to pay for the services that basically allow us to have civilization. So we appreciate you taking time. And I'm going to just turn quickly to a greeting that we received from the Government of Canada. So I'm going to ask Jamie to cue the video. As they say, cue the video.
Hello, it's Mary Ng here, Canada's Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business, and Economic Development. It's my pleasure to join you for this year's Summit on the City, Recovering Canada's Downtowns. I want to begin by thanking Mary and the entire Canadian Urban Institute team for your invitation and for your continued efforts throughout the pandemic to support our communities. I want to start also by thanking the incredible small businesses and entrepreneurs at the heart of our main streets and downtowns. You have shown incredible resilience throughout the pandemic, and now with the Omicron variant and renewed lockdowns, I want to assure you that our government will continue to have your back and to be there to support you as we have for the last 2 years. Supports that include the extended Canada Recovery Hiring Program and the expanded worker lockdown benefit, as well as new programs for hardest hit businesses like those in the tourism industry. I also want to give a shout out to the Chambers of Commerce's and the Boards of Trade who have helped to work with us and businesses to get over 15 million rapid tests to our workplaces across Canada. We're directly supporting Main Street businesses, including through innovative My Main Street program for Southern Ontario, led by the Canadian Urban Institute and Economic Developers Council of Ontario. This $23 million investment from Minister Helena Jassic and our government will support downtown revitalization. We're going to continue to work to ensure that our main streets remain vibrant and strong. As the Minister of both small business and international trade, I know that downtowns are not only hubs for thriving small businesses, but they're dynamic ecosystems that are key to driving Canada's innovation and supporting our country's long-term growth and our competitiveness. This is why we're taking a Team Canada approach, working with provinces, municipalities, and industry to attract talent, to market our thriving cities as leading global investment destinations, and ensuring that our innovators and our entrepreneurs have the resources to start up, to scale up, and to access those international markets. Supporting our innovators and our entrepreneurs and our main streets will ensure that we drive a strong, sustainable, inclusive recovery and for growth for years to come. I want you to know that our government will always have your back. Thank you, and have a terrific conference.
That's good of the minister to just signal an important commitment from the Government of Canada. We invited many ministers, and as I suggested, there are various scheduling conflicts. But just for everybody to be aware, we do these are really public conversations. And what we're trying to do is surface the biggest challenges and then the solutions that you all collectively have in mind. So those of you on the chat, those of you watching, if you haven't checked into the chat, please check into the chat, and you can correspond with us there in that function over the next 2 days and log ideas and ask questions. And lots of people in the chat end up chatting to each other. But it's a way for us to make sure that we're collecting all the smart ideas and that we're benefiting from the intelligence you're bringing and the imagination and the solutions that you're bringing. So if you're not on the chat, come on the chat. And it would be great if you could tell us where you're coming in from. People will see now. There are people coming in from different parts of the world, different cities across the country, different communities of all sizes. So really valuable for us to have the chat. And we encourage you to use it. And the other thing is that this session is available for the next 2 days. We're working en français et en anglais. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see an option for you to be able to choose the language that you would prefer to hear in. So you toggle that, and if you'd like to hear in French, toggle French. If you would like to hear in English, toggle English. The translators have already said to me, could I speak more slowly, which I will, of course, try to do, because when I speak French, I need people to speak slowly to me. So as I suggested, this is really about a dialogue. And we have a number of folks that have come on, that are coming on over the 2 days, but there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of others who could have taken those spots. So what we've tried to do is curate conversations for people to be able to hear one another and be able to offer perspectives that are unique to them, but there will be, as we know, many, many others that have other views. And so I'm hoping that we'll have a real opportunity to have candid, frank conversations with one another about why are downtowns significant? One of the reasons we started this topic was because I used to quote Mayor Daley, the first Mayor Daley. Kristyn, I don't know if you'll remember him, but you're too young probably. But he said an apple rot. He was questioned as to why he was spending so much investment in downtown Chicago. And he said, because an apple rots from the core. And so that's part of what we're trying to suggest here, and why we want, it's important that Minister Ng has signaled that the Government of Canada is listening, and we know that the various staffs of the various ministers and cabinet members are actually listening to these conversations. We, as you know, copy them, we record them, and then we will repackage them and try to continue the advocacy through 2022 about why downtowns need to be treated in a particular kind of way, and that we need a particular kind of strategy. So I might turn to you for a minute, Kristyn, and then I see that the Mayor and our other session participants are coming on. But I want to go first to you, Kristyn. Just give us a perspective, as I suggested. You actually are smack dab on one of the most famous downtown streets that we've got in the country. What's your perspective about the challenge that faces downtowns?
Mary, thank you for the question, and thank you to everyone here today. The biggest challenges that we have right now in the downtown core, and you're right, Mary, I'm right off of historic Yonge Street, the busiest major arterial road in the city, but also Ontario and Canada, is that we are seeing the flight of businesses. We went from being locked down to locked out, and I'm personally struggling, as I see friends lose their business, long-time business owners, major employers and contributors to the city. And it just seems that the pandemic has, number one, continued on and persisted, a lot of unknowns still in the future. But perhaps the biggest challenge I'm hearing from my constituents, the business operators and owners, is that they feel that government support programs haven't gone enough. So we know that downtowns have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, as you've noted. We were the first to be locked down, especially in urban centers, especially for those of us who are visitor destinations, and we'll probably be the last to reopen. So when I have about less than 10% occupancy in the financial district, major bank towers and service towers all empty, it also means that I don't have the commuters, I don't have the visitors, I don't have the workers coming in to support our local economy. That means also that the regional lag of how Ontario will recover is going to be slow. So if governments really want to support the downtowns, then they need to be able to invest deeply and proportionally on those areas and the businesses that were the hardest hit, the first hit. And if they want to bring back better, and they've talked about building back better, then they're going to have to reinvest downtown and help us reopen safely as soon as possible, and make sure that they're consistent in their messaging. And that's one thing I would offer as a first oversight of what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, isn't it? Because, a lot of what we've been talking about generally with COVID is that it exacerbated pre-existing conditions. right? So if there were things that were underlying in a community that were challenging, and I'm sure we're going to hear that from people again and again, they just have become much worse through COVID. And I think that, again, I remember that Yonge Street has had many stages, many state lives of Yonge Street, right? And it's just sort of an indication. Not every street is the same, and not every street's experience is the same. I guess that's part of the point. But there are, as you're suggesting, there are opportunities now for us to address some things in a much more systemic way than we might have before, right? I mean,
And that's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a brilliant observation, and I think that would be a colossal missed opportunity if governments don't learn from what we didn't act on before. And I think that most who are invested in downtown living and downtown commerce will have told you that we already knew the answers. We know what we need. We've known it for decades now, but it's getting the orders of government to particularly invest in the core of the city. I work in an amalgamated city council. I'm quite struck by how fractured it is politically at times. And I think that if this is just an example, is that, there's oftentimes suburban-minded councillors, suburban-minded politicians who represent perhaps the north and the rural that just don't understand the needs of the downtown. So we're oftentimes seen as, the folks who get everything, but they don't recognize that, the city of Toronto, for example, in the downtown, we occupy 3% of the landmass, but we generate 51% of the GDP. And that's just for the area. So if we want to bring back better and to build jobs and to rebuild our vibrant main streets, which then become healthier neighborhoods, more inclusive and more vibrant neighborhoods, then those investments have got to come. And I think that we can make the case that an investment in the downtown core is actually going to have multiplying effects everywhere, whether it's in culture or or perhaps in the financial sector, which of course Toronto is known for. But those vibrant retail streets, those vibrant environments means that you have an area that can then attract visitors and tourists alike. And that's something that I also want to speak to, is that we've got to start to think about reopening the economy, including the borders, in a way that will allow us to just learn to live with the COVID pandemic, which we know is not going to go away, including the variants, and do it safely and do it as soon as possible.
I guess it's a real test for resilience, isn't it? It's really how are we making ourselves more resilient to whatever the challenges are ahead. And if we continue to congregate, we continue to draw, if money continues to aggregate, if people continue to aggravate, aggregate, and if we continue to live lives that are shared lives, as you say, it's part of it. Just to answer some questions in the chat. First of all, yes, the recordings are made public. They're made available. They'll be posted on the Canada website in a couple of days, depending on how long it takes us. And we encourage you to share them with folks. All of the city talks over the last 2 years are there. Lots of professors using them with classes, lots of school teachers using them, lots of community groups still using them. Really a really interesting trove of information. And what I heard the councillor just say, which I think is so important, we're going to have to try to find a way to really learn, because we've done all sorts of things really well over the last 2 years, and we've done things not so well. So we're going to have to try to steel ourselves to really take whatever we can to be reflective about what worked and what didn't. And all these recordings are really valuable for that. So thank you for joining us, Councillor. I know you have to rush back, but I hope you'll stay for whatever portion you can in the next couple of minutes. We've now got 3 venerable, I bet they don't like being called venerable because it's kind of code for age, but 3 folks who have occupied various roles and positions that have seen it from both sides now, shall we say, particularly you, Mayor Sohi. You have seen it from both sides now. So we're delighted to have you and Goldie and Michael with us. And I'm going to go to you first, Mayor Sohi, to just give us a picture from, I don't know whether it's sunny today, sunny Edmonton, but just give us a sense, because just for the benefit, we'll put in the chat the bios for each of these folks. But as people probably realize, Mayor Sohi, before he was a mayor, was actually a federal minister and a minister of infrastructure and communities. So as I suggested, lots of years of experience. Over to you, Mayor Sohi. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you, Mary, and nice to see some other familiar faces. And Goldie, nice to see you again. Some folks that I had a chance to work with in Ottawa. And you're right, I have seen things from both sides. And I can tell you, coming back to local government is really refreshing, because this is where you can get some good work done in a nonpartisan way and still have a decent private life where you get to go home at the end of the day to your family, right? And not traveling back and forth to Ottawa from Edmonton. So, I was listening into Councillor from Toronto, Councillor Wong-Tam, about the importance of downtown. I can tell you, like our downtown, land mass in our downtown is about 1%, and downtown contributes about 10% of the tax base. And we actually, as a city council, not just city council, when I was back on city council in from 2007 till 2015, we really understood the importance of downtown for economic growth, but for social vibrancy, and also building inclusive, welcoming places and applying that equity lens to the work that we do. During COVID, downtown has been devastated. Our downtown has been devastated. We have, our houseless population has doubled over the COVID. We are facing a serious crisis of opiate crisis, deaths, and every day we experience, people dying on the street, and we have huge safety issues in the downtown. So COVID has really highlighted some of the weaknesses in the society in how we have not done enough to support the most vulnerable, and have not dealt with some of the structural challenges on inequities and that we have faced. Now they're having severe consequences for recovery of downtown and other business districts. So that is the challenge that we're facing. So it directly links to ability for small businesses to do business in a safe way and grow business, inability for us to attract investment because of those challenges. And if we are unable to meet these challenges, then we will not be able to revitalize downtowns. So there's a big role for coordination and collaboration with provincial governments and the federal government. Absolutely. So that's one thing I wanted to kind of let me know when you want me to stop, Mary, because there are other panelists who want to weigh in on this, and we can get into the discussion. But there is hope on the horizon. There is hope on the horizon because people do realize that if your downtown is not thriving, your community will not be thriving. You will not be able to attract the investment that we need to attract. So we are working very closely with Downtown Business Association, with the provincial government and the federal government to put together some ideas. We have put our money where our mouth is by having money allocated for the vibrancy task force for the Edmonton's downtown. And yesterday we reaffirmed our commitment for having a potential of 5,000 people move into downtown through a new development that is in the works for over the few years, but we confirmed that commitment or reconfirmed that commitment yesterday. So things are happening, but hoping that soon this COVID will be behind us, that we can actually start focusing on the recovery and start bringing back people into the downtown to work here, to live here, and to enjoy themselves. I think one closing remark I want to make, Mary, is that one thing I noticed that there's so much potential for us to tap into our multiculturalism and our indigenous cultures and organize more festivals and entertainment downtown and bring more people to enjoy themselves in the downtown. So there's a lot of work that we can do. So I'll stop here. We'll go into a Q&A later on.
Thanks, Mayor Sohi. I mean, I think you're right. These underlying conditions is exactly what we're hoping we can get to the heart of. Part of what we're trying to do over the 2 days is zero in on an action plan. What needs to happen? Who needs to lead it? What's the role of local government? What's the role of provinces? What's the role of the feds? And what's the role of all of us? So I'm going to go next to Goldie Hyder, if I may, from the Business Council. I know, Goldie, you've been traveling the globe on this, and you and I have had a few conversations about an apple rotting from its core. So can I get your perspective on downtowns? Then we'll go to you, Michael, and then we'll have a conversation with the three of you. Go ahead, Goldie.
Sure.
Nice to see you.
Likewise, thank you so much, Mary, for your leadership throughout this pandemic. And Mayor Sohi, congratulations belatedly. Great to see you again, my friend. Appreciate it. Michael, good to be on with you. Look, some of this is going to be redundant, but I think it has to be said, right? Downtowns are like the lifeblood to a city. They help define the characteristics of the city. They're the magnet for the talent. They're the magnet for the investment. They're the magnet for the entertainment. All the things that even if you live outside, you got to drive in to go and enjoy, or you got to take a train down to go and enjoy. So I have a lot of optimism about downtowns, because this is where the concentration of our public is. And we are by nature social creatures. And so despite all the anxieties that people face about it'll never be the same again, and life will forever change, and we're never going to go back to the office and all of that. My master's thesis was actually on policy making in times of crisis. And what it showed was a couple of things. One is, don't do it. Don't make policy changes in times of crisis, including operational changes to your business and things, because all crises end. And when they end, you will find, and this is point two, that the field has been littered with people who forecast about how much people have changed and how life will never, ever be the same again. And then shockingly, even with 50 million people dying in the Spanish flu, life actually goes back to being the same, because we haven't changed any. We are social creatures. We need social interaction. We need the entertainment. We need the culture. We need the arts. We need the jobs. We need the things that downtowns are known for. So I'm extremely optimistic that it's going to come back. The question is, how long will it take? When will it happen? And what will the consequences be if it drags on too long in terms of economic carnage? I think we frankly owe our SME communities a lot. With all due respect to the public sector and the private sector, most of whom, which is why we had relatively low unemployment, the unemployment didn't get that high, were able to pivot. They were able to work from home, as I'm doing today, because of our lockdown here. We have been able to, people have been able to do their jobs. They've been able to save money. They haven't had to go and get a parking spot. They haven't had to use the transit and any of that. But those SMEs don't have that choice. Those SMEs and all those frontline workers and all the people who had to keep the essential services going and all the things that we had to rely on, they didn't have that luxury. And I spoke with, Mayor Sohi's counterpart here in Ottawa, Mayor Watson, on a few occasions. He said, look, only half my workforce, if not more, doesn't have the luxury of not coming to work. They come to work. They have no choice. They're ambulance drivers, they're policemen, they're all these things. So I think we have to recognize that we actually owe a little something back to those who didn't have that choice. The SMEs who, misfortunately took a bank loan in December 2019 to open up that bakery they've always wanted to open up. How many people whose mortgages are exposed here? How many livelihoods are exposed here? And you can't subsidize that. There's only so much you can do of that. Mayor sat at the minister's tables. He knows there are limits to that. And we probably arrived at that now. We have to start micro-targeting even more. So I think we need some leadership. I've been aggressive on this thing. I've long believed that we have to coexist with this thing. It's a competitive disadvantage to Europe and Asia if their economies take off and their cities take off, because talent and capital has never been more mobile than it is today. So if you don't give a reason for people to come, it'll just go somewhere else. It's not like desperate to come to Toronto or to Edmonton or Calgary. So we've got to be mindful of that. I think the other opportunity here is really about improving the experience of being in downtown and as a transitory exercise. It's depressing if you go down there, and if the path is closed, if the plus 15s, as we call them in Alberta, are locked up or whatever. You got to make this worthwhile for people to say, come back. And we've got to do our part to make sure that can happen. And a lot of that starts with people returning. And I can tell you, in the privileged position that I have of interacting with CEOs of Canada's largest businesses representing over 2 million employees or so forth, they want their people back. Sure, we'll discuss one day here or one day there, or whatever the case might be. But at the end of the day, we believe in the importance of collaboration, of learning, of sharing, of co-creation, of incidental, learning and hearing that goes on in a hallway or whatever the case might be. That is all being lost. And we've got to bring that back. And I think that when we come out of this situation with Omicron, I'm extremely optimistic that this thing is, at least for now, killing itself and we're going to be okay. Well, let's not wait too long. And that brings me to my final point. And that is simply this. Confidence is the key here. We have really pummeled away at the subconscious of Canadians to say, you're going to die and you're going to be exposed and you're going to risk your family and you're going to risk. Excuse me. We take risks every day. And we have to recalibrate that we can coexist with this pandemic. We have to build confidence. And we've been very proud to launch a program, perhaps prematurely, but in May of 2020, called the Post Promise. And the city of Edmonton is aware of it. And basically it stands for People Outside Safely Together. But the key word being post. implying that we've been through this. We're going to be able to get to the other side. And what it really is about helping SMEs, and the federal government has been a major supporter, the Honourable Mary Ng and others, to help get businesses to be able to showcase to their customers, we're doing what we need to keep you safe. There is no business whose fiduciary duty it is not to keep their employees and their customers safe, because if it is, they'll be out of business. So of course it's a priority for businesses to keep them safe. How do you communicate that in a world in which people have been told to be scared? And how do you communicate that in terms of an identifiable way of how you're going to be able to say, oh yeah, this place is practicing, good hygiene and good public health measures. So I think we have to turn our attention to how to restore public confidence and how to make the downtown experience a positive one and start the process of reviving and resuscitating. And I'm not touching some of my other remarks, saving them for your Q&A, but I think there's public policy opportunities around climate change and infrastructure and smart cities and those kinds of things. So let me leave it at that, Mary.
Thanks, Goldie. Let's go to you, Michael, and then hopefully we will have some time for a bit of exchange between the three of you. Go ahead, Michael. Let's hear your perspective from downtown, your downtown office, I can tell from what's behind you.
Well, I'll be uncharacteristically brief. Two comments Goldie made that I'd like to pick up on. One is confidence, the second is business. Maybe I'll start with business. Mayor Sohi and Councillor Wong-Tam spoke about the government's role, and they're critical. And I'm of the view that the governments have by and large served Canadians well through this period of crisis. Nobody got everything right. Nobody didn't make mistakes, but I think our governments seriously encountered and engaged and did their best for the citizens of this country. And I, for one, am grateful. Number two, I think business has a very big responsibility as well. And whereas Canadian business did a good job of, shall we say, leaving the concentrated areas at the onset of the pandemic, Canadian business has not done a good job, in my opinion, in returning to the environments where work can optimally be performed. I've spoken about the chartered banks. I think they have been somewhat delinquent in getting their people back to work, populating the downtown cores in a way that would allow the small businesses to reopen and would allow the men and women employed by the small businesses to actually contribute going forward to the recovery. Turning to confidence, there is no doubt in my mind that Canada's major urban centers will recover. The forces of intensification are so great in Canada, the concentration of talent so profound, the diversity of the population so significant, that I don't think there's anything that will fundamentally alter the ongoing intensification of Canadian cities. That doesn't mean we can be passive and just allow the cities to return to the kind of buoyancy we saw pre-pandemic. I think we all have to make an effort as members of a large and complex community. But I can tell you, as the CEO of a public entity that raises capital globally, Canada is not a significant player for global investors. That's nothing new. But this is what's interesting. Canadian cities are on the radar screen of every global investor we have ever met with in Europe, in Asia, in the United States, and elsewhere. Our cities are extraordinary success stories. Our cities are more diverse than most. Our cities benefit from immigration and capturing more than our share of the world's talent pools than most. And we should have confidence in their recovery. And those of us in business must discharge our responsibilities to the communities and get back to work and get back to optimal collaborative enterprise. If we don't, we will lose competitive ground to other countries who are maybe more proactive in dealing with the situation that we all face and we all need to be respectful of. So those would be my thoughts for what they're worth.
Thanks, Michael. Go ahead, Goldie. You want to jump in, and then I'd like to ask the mayor something.
Of course I do. He goaded me, so I have to say something here. Look, all Canadians are responsible for following public health guidelines. And throughout this process, we've been exposed to public health guidelines from every level of government. And compliance has been at the core of it. So obviously, you're in a lockdown, you sent your people home. You want them back. Believe me when I say they want them back. I know, I talked to them. The challenge has now become that people have gotten comfortable. People have gotten, I like this idea. I don't have to drive. I don't have to take a train. I don't have to do this and I don't have to do that. We have a severe labor shortage in this marketplace. So it's a supply and demand problem here. We need a lot more talent here. And so the power has shifted a little bit over to the employee side. And I will tell you that this is not a global phenomena. It is largely a North American phenomena. It is not happening in Europe and it's not happening in Asia. It's actually happening here. And the reason it's happening, multiple things. We have larger homes. So we're not suffocated here. We're able to live and spread out and do what we need to do. We have tougher commutes to some extent, longer commutes than places that have high-speed rail and all those other kinds of things. We had very generous support programs. All kinds of things created a scenario where people thought, well, this working from home thing works for me, right? And so that is a part of the challenge. And I'll tell you candidly that many companies are really being run by their HR departments and their legal counsels today because of risk management. But at some point, I can tell you that we people want their workers back. It's in their workers' interests to come back. Secondly, I'll just say that from a risk management perspective, businesses went out of their way to make sure of safety, right? So we drove the rapid screening program. Many public health officials across the country didn't want you to use rapid screening. It was businesses who said, look, rapid screening can be a tool to help allow for safe return. Members of ours have PCR tests done on site for their employees. The problem has become we can't get the worker back. And I think that's a fundamental issue. And part of that is the experience. And part of that is this whole hybrid and, I want to work from home thing. Yeah, maybe for a while. But I think, as I said, as things change, they probably will look pretty much the same. So just something to keep in mind. And then the last point, just very quickly, is our healthcare system was really exposed here. And that's where I tell you, you're looking at the guy who helped shut the economy down. I can't believe I would ever be running a business council, putting out a letter with 100 and some odd CEOs saying, shut the economy down. Why did we do that? I got a phone call, several phone calls on a weekend from some of our members who all serve on boards of hospitals saying, if we don't do this now, the hospital system will collapse. We're 2 years into this thing and we're still whacking a mole with ICU beds. Like, we spent $350 billion. We couldn't improve the ICU capacity. It's the only reason we're locking down. It's the only reason we're not able to come back to work. So we have to get to the root of the matter on some of these public policy questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that, the conversation can get very big very quickly there. And so I'm going to try to take it back if I can. Just for the people in the chat that are saying, hey, I thought this was about downtowns. It's about cities. It's about downtowns. Downtowns are proxies for cities. And I'm sure that the mayor has a perspective on that because he was actually a federal minister for communities. But I think, Mayor, I'm interested in your perspective about the specific challenges downtowns may be facing, which may be quite different for the largest cities than the smaller ones, right? And do you have a sense of how the federal government could take a more holistic approach to this? I mean, how you only have so many levers. We have a constitution, but at the same time, what you're hearing from your colleagues on this session here is that so much is at stake in terms of how we recover as a country is visible here in how we're going to build downtowns to be productive and inclusive and all that stuff. Thoughts?
Yes, first of all, I agree with Michael and Gordy about the confidence, right? Portray that confidence, absolutely. But when we talk about post-pandemic world, I think my worry is that we actually may go back to the conditions that existed before COVID on things that were holding us back, particularly in houselessness, on mental health, on addictions. Like, those are not new problems. Those problems have existed for decades, and we have not properly tackled them. So I think that's my worry, that in in that optimism and that hope for the new future and coming out of COVID, that we might forget there are structural challenges in our cities. And if we don't tackle them properly, then we would not be living up to the potential, particularly the potential of downtowns, right? Because they're interconnected.
I mean, we have sessions following here that are going to deal with all this and housing and mental health.
On your question about what federal government can do,
Yeah.
right? There are models that federal government can follow. They announced during the pandemic a rapid housing initiative, directly working with municipalities to build more housing.
Right.
I think that is a model that federal government can follow. I think another thing that federal government can do is really focus on indigenous-led housing and indigenous-led business development, as well as indigenous-led support systems that are necessary. Because in my city, 60% of the people who are struggling with houselessness are from indigenous communities, and there are not proper culturally appropriate support systems available for them to recover from trauma and recover from the pain that they're going through, right? That's one, right? I think another is there are things that federal government can do on opiate crisis, safe supply, for example, harm reduction, and other things that are readily available, tools available to the federal government that can be actually explored in partnership with the municipalities, right? And the third one is through infrastructure. When I was a minister of infrastructure, we actually directly dealt with the municipalities on transit funding. We designed our plan so the money actually directly went to municipality instead of going through through provincial allocation of per capita or other formula. And I think there are new programs like sustainable modes of transportation or a Main Streets program that federal government is announcing or would announce or has announced. I think it has announced.
We've announced it. We're administering it, so we know that one. My Main Street.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So and I think those are the opportunities for federal government to actually directly work with big cities and major urban centers to bring more life back into downtown.
Yeah. So just for the three of you, with the 5 minutes we've got left, I mean, I appreciate your call to action, both Michael and Goldie, saying to your fellow business leaders, come on, guys, let's get ourselves back at it and let's do it safely. I want to acknowledge
Mary,
that,
just to make sure you remember, I also said public service.
Yes, I understand. Yes, well, no,
across
listen.
this country that represent a big part of our downtowns. In some cases, like Charlottetown, they're a large part of downtown. So
or
we
the
need
city
them,
of,
we need
or
them both back.
Or the city of Ottawa, 65% of the tenant base. Yes, I appreciate that. So it's up to all of us. And you heard the mayor just reinforce that from his vantage point, his previous vantage point, he thinks there's an opportunity for the government of Canada to take a more holistic approach. And as you just suggested, Mayor, I wonder if, in terms of the mental health piece, because health, and Goldie highlighted this, because health is traditionally a provincial jurisdiction that the federal government funds, the question is going to be, could we see a different kind of leadership come from the government of Canada around downtown recovery? Could it include health, housing, and transit?
I think particularly related to mental health of Indigenous communities, because there's a linkage, there's a responsibility for the federal government for urban Indigenous population that they have not really fulfilled, right? And I think there's an opportunity for direct partnership on mental health as well.
I guess partnership is the word, eh? Michael, when you've been at this, you're working in I don't know how many cities, 10 probably, right?
I think about that many, yes.
Yeah, and appreciating that no downtown is the same and no city is the same. But in terms of the sort of priorities that you will be having for 2022, do you have a sense of, assuming that we move into a new kind of normal, whatever that's going to be, do you have a sense of the priorities that you're going to try to engage your stakeholders in thinking about?
I think the priorities are not dissimilar to those that existed pre-pandemic and during the pandemic.
Right.
I think the real estate business has evolved in a way that most owners recognize their buildings are part of a much larger ecosystem. And they need to contribute not just to the well-being of the men and women who use the buildings, but actually to the well-being of the surrounding community. So I would say our view in 2022 is to make sure that our concentrated portfolios of property in all of the major cities we're in Canada contribute in a meaningful way to the recovery of the community at large. And this really is part of the ESG evolution that's occurring globally and in the business sector, among many others. So for us, the priority is to serve the men and women who use our buildings as effectively as humanly possible, and to allow our communities, which are mixed use urban communities, to recover as meaningfully as possible.
I mean, it seems to me that part of the downtown challenge is to create more mixed use, to use buildings differently, and not that, so that we're not as vulnerable if we have to adjust all of a sudden, right? Goldie, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was just going to say that's the beauty of how our cities have evolved since the mid-90s. Now we have these mutually reinforcing uses. People live downtown, people work downtown, retailers come in to serve the burgeoning populations downtown, entertainment.
Right.
Food.
And you can, and Councillor Bortolan's just saying, and what about childcare? Like maybe some of these buildings are going to be adjusted for childcare services as we provide more and more ranges of services in these downtowns. Goldie, a last comment to you, and then a last comment to the mayor, and then we're going to move on to the next session. Go ahead, Goldie.
Let me take a different tact. I would say first thing is leadership and partnership is an opportunity for the federal government on a variety of different issues, and it has a convening power. And I think Canadians deserve to see all of our levels of government work intimately together. I don't disagree with Michael at all. I think all said and done, our governments did a pretty good job of getting us through this pandemic. But nevertheless, there are times where Canadians were frustrated with the idea that they were a municipal Canadian and a provincial Canadian and a federal Canadian. And we've got to really, stop that and start working together in our national interests. And so I think leadership and partnership could go a long way in setting the right opportunity for a conversation and a dialogue to get the solutions on the table. I think what people like Michael and the mayor and so many people know what to do is creating the political will and the opportunity to do it.
Well, and just to interrupt you, Goldie, and just say that one of the things I'm aware of is that, there's only men on this session. I'm holding my own as best I can, but we're not.
It's an even battle, actually, 3-1. We feel like it's an even.
I know, yeah, but we're not as diverse as we need to be. This program, of course, doesn't reflect as much diversity as as it needs to, and this has to be a partnership across different kinds of folks, different experiences, different racial backgrounds, different perspectives. Right? That's one of the great challenges, I think.
Yeah, and then just my second point, very quickly, because it's an area where I think there's untapped potential still, and at least one of us on this panel had a responsibility, and directly and indirectly. And that is, we've really got to use our infrastructure bank better. We've got to get that money out the door. They're sitting on $25 billion worth of it, which is probably $50 to $75 billion when people like Michael and others jump into it and the markets get involved and public-private partnerships happen. Let's reimagine some of our cities. Let's make them smart.
Huge opportunity.
Let's have some of those conversations. We sent a signal to the markets on Sidewalk Labs, where I said, oh no, Canada's not for innovation. Canada's not for trying anything. We've got to make sure that we figure out what to do, how to do it. I'm not commenting on that previous saga, but just we've got to start thinking differently. And I think infrastructure money, not only for housing, but beyond that, is going to be key to revitalizing our downtowns.
30 seconds to you, Mayor Sohi, and then we're going to go to the next session.
Well, just to follow up on that, I think let's use that infrastructure bank to help, retrofit some of the buildings in the downtown, to repurpose them and also bring them to better energy standards. I think it's about jobs, it's about climate change, it's about affordability, and all those things can be tackled through that change alone if there's a will to do so. The second is that I hope if one thing that pandemic has taught us is that Canadians want us to work together. They don't care which order of government you belong to. They want us to work together. I hope that we carry that on into the future.
Thank you. On that happy note, I just want to thank Mayor Sohi and Michael and Goldie and Councillor Wong-Tam for joining us in this opening session. And we always say this isn't the end of the conversation; it's just the beginning. So you've given us a really good list of things, and we have people in the wings here who are pulling all these ideas and actions. And at the end of each day, we're going to do summaries, and hopefully by the end of tomorrow, have a good sort of beginning of an action plan. So thanks for joining us, you three, and the councillor. And now we're going to go to hear some specifics about how Canadian cities actually do compare with cities around the world, is sort of echoing some comments and concerns that Goldie aired and Michael reiterated.